Imagine if you spent your entire life sacrificing everything, every single penny and every ounce of your energy, to give your daughter the world, only for her to look you in the eye and tell you that you aren't welcome at the family Christmas table because you don't fit the aesthetic of her new life. That was my reality when my daughter, Chloe, called me 3 weeks ago and said those words that still ring in my head. "Mom, don't come to Christmas, we just really need space this year." It wasn't about space though. It was about the fact that she had married into a family of high society snobs, and she was ashamed of the woman who scrubbed floors to pay for her Ivy League tuition. She told me I was too loud, too unrefined, and that my presence would make things awkward with her new in-laws. Was I wrong for how I responded? Tell me, honestly, would you have stayed quiet and accepted being discarded like old trash? Or would you have made sure they realized exactly what they were losing? I've spent the last 24 years being Chloe's biggest cheerleader, and her only safety net. Her father left when she was just a toddler, leaving us with nothing but a mountain of debt and a rusted-out car. I worked 3 jobs for a decade, moving from a waitress at a diner in the mornings to cleaning office buildings at night. Also, she could have the best clothes, the best tutors, and the best opportunities. I never complained. I wore the same pair of shoes for 4 years, so she could have the designer dress she wanted for prom. When she got into an expensive university, I took out a second mortgage and worked double shifts on weekends to ensure she graduated debt-free. She was my everything. My daily routine for years was a blur of exhaustion. I would wake up at 4:30 a.m. to prep her breakfast and leave for the diner. By the time she was coming home from school, I was already heading to my second job at the laundromat, and my nights were spent alone in cold, empty skyscrapers, pushing a vacuum and emptying trash cans. I remember the blisters on my feet and the way my back ached so badly I could barely stand straight, but every time I looked at her report cards or saw her smiling in her school photos, the pain just vanished. I wanted her to have a life where she never had to check the price tag of a gallon of milk or worry if the electricity would be cut off. I gave her that life at the expense of my own youth and health. Things started to change about 2 years ago when she met Julian. Julian comes from old money, the kind of family that owns summer homes in the Hamptons and talks about golf handicaps, as if they are matters of national security. At first, I was happy for her. I thought she had finally found the security I struggled so hard to provide. I remember meeting him for the first time. He shook my hand with a limp grip and looked at my callous fingers like they were something he'd studied in a biology textbook. He was polite, but it was that cold, distant politeness that makes you feel like you're standing outside in the rain. But the more time she spent with Julian's family, the more she began to pull away from me. She started correcting my grammar in front of his friends. She started critiquing my clothes, telling me that floral patterns were tacky, and that I should invest in beige or charcoal. She would go weeks without calling, and when she did, it was only to ask for money to help with her social expenses, because she didn't want Julian to know she wasn't as wealthy as they were. She needed a $5,000 bag just to go to a brunch. She needed a specific designer coat for a weekend trip to Aspen. I kept giving, dipping into my meager savings, thinking it was just a phase, but the disrespect only grew. I felt like a ghost in her life, a bank account that she only visited when the balance got low. This year was supposed to be special because it was their first Christmas as a married couple, and they were hosting a massive gala at their new estate. An estate, mind you, that I helped them put the down payment on by selling my mother's antique jewelry, the only things I had left of my own heritage. I had my dress ready, a simple but elegant navy blue gown that I had saved up for months to buy, and I was so looking forward to seeing my daughter. I imagined us sipping cocoa by the fire after the guests left, just like we used to in our cramped little apartment. Then came the phone call. Chloe's voice was cold, professional almost. She told me that Julian's parents were staying with them, and that they had invited several high-profile business associates, including a senator and a few tech CEOs. She said that my energy was a bit too much for the refined atmosphere they were trying to cultivate. She literally said, "Mom, you just don't understand how these people operate, and I don't want to spend the whole night worrying if you're going to say something embarrassing or talk about your old cleaning jobs, or how you used to clip coupons." I contacted the high-end catering company they had hired, a company I happened to know the owner of, a man named Arthur, because I had cleaned his offices for 15 years. I told him the situation, every heartbreaking detail, and he was absolutely horrified. He told me he had seen many ungrateful children in his line of work, but this took the cake. He agreed to let me join the serving staff for the night of the gala. I didn't want to just sit home. I wanted to see the look on their faces when the embarrassment they tried to hide was right in front of them, serving them hors d'oeuvres. I wanted to see the reality of the life she thought she was too good for. On the night of the party, I arrived early, dressed in the standard black and white server's uniform. I pulled my hair back tight and wore a mask of professional neutrality. I kept my head down and worked hard, moving through the glittering crowd of people in tuxedos and silk gowns. The house looked beautiful, filled with the expensive furniture and art that I had helped procure. I saw Chloe, looking radiant in a dress that probably cost more than my first car, laughing with Julian's mother, a woman who looked like she'd never had a hair out of place in her life. I walked right past them several times with a tray of appetizers, and they didn't even look at me. To them, I was just another invisible member of the help. It was sickening to see how easily she slipped into that role of ignoring the working class. I waited for the perfect moment. It was during the main toast. Julian was standing at the top of the grand staircase, clinking a crystal glass, thanking everyone for coming and talking about how family and tradition were the most important things in the world. He talked about his parents and how they inspired him to be a man of character. He didn't mention me once. He didn't mention the woman who had spent her weekends painting their nursery, or the woman who had bailed them out when their credit cards were maxed out. As the applause died down, I walked straight up to the front with a tray of the finest champagne. I stopped right in front of Chloe and Julian's mother. Chloe's face went from a smug smile to a mask of pure, unadulterated horror as she recognized my eyes. Her glass nearly slipped from her hand, splashing a bit of wine onto her white silk gown. I smiled the brightest, most unrefined smile I could muster and said loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear, "I hope the champagne is to your liking, Chloe." I made sure to pick the extra expensive bottles, since I'm the one paying the bill for them anyway. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. Julian's mother looked confused, asking Chloe who this server was and why she was being so forward. I didn't wait for Chloe to answer. I looked her mother-in-law in the eye and said, "I'm the woman who paid for this house, the woman who paid for Chloe's Ivy League education, and the woman she told was too embarrassing to be a guest at her table tonight. I'm her mother. But since I'm so good at cleaning up after people, I thought I'd come by and see if there was any more trash that needed taking out." Chloe tried to usher me away, whispering frantically for me to stop, her face turning a deep, shameful shade of red. She kept saying, "Mom, you're ruining everything. Please just go to the kitchen." But I wasn't done. I pulled out a thick, legal envelope from my apron pocket. Julian was standing at the top of the grand staircase, clinking a crystal glass, thanking everyone for coming and talking about how family and tradition were the most important things in the world. He talked about his parents and how they inspired him to be a man of character. He didn't mention me once. He didn't mention the woman who had spent her weekends painting their nursery, or the woman who had bailed them out when their credit cards were maxed out. As the applause died down, I walked straight up to the front with a tray of the finest champagne. I stopped right in front of Chloe and Julian's mother. Chloe's face went from a smug smile to a mask of pure, unadulterated horror as she recognized my eyes. Her glass nearly slipped from her hand, splashing a bit of wine onto her white silk gown. I smiled the brightest, most unrefined smile I could muster and said loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear, "I hope the champagne is to your liking, Chloe." I made sure to pick the extra expensive bottles, since I'm the one paying the bill for them anyway. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. Julian's mother looked confused, asking Chloe who this server was and why she was being so forward. I didn't wait for Chloe to answer. I looked her mother-in-law in the eye and said, "I'm the woman who paid for this house, the woman who paid for Chloe's Ivy League education, and the woman she told was too embarrassing to be a guest at her table tonight. I'm her mother. But since I'm so good at cleaning up after people, I thought I'd come by and see if there was any more trash that needed taking out." Chloe tried to usher me away, whispering frantically for me to stop, her face turning a deep, shameful shade of red. She kept saying, "Mom, you're ruining everything. Please just go to the kitchen." But I wasn't done. I pulled out a thick, legal envelope from my apron pocket. "Since we're talking about space, Chloe, I've decided to give you exactly what you asked for. This is a formal notice that I am selling this property. I've already signed with an agent, and since I'm the sole owner, the house goes on the market tomorrow morning. You and Julian have 30 days to find a new refined place to live that fits your aesthetic. I'm sure Julian's parents would love to have you move into their guest wing, assuming they actually have the money they claim to have." Julian stepped forward, trying to look intimidating, but he had nothing to say when I reminded him that I had the records of every payment he forgot to make. The business associates began to whisper and pull away, the scandal spreading through the room like wildfire. Julian's parents looked like they wanted to sink into the floor, realizing their son's lifestyle was a complete sham funded by a cleaning lady. I walked out of that house with my head held high, stripped off the server's jacket in the driveway, and drove away feeling lighter than I had in years. The air felt fresher. The stars looked brighter. In the weeks that followed, Chloe tried to call me 100 times, swinging between begging for forgiveness and screaming at me for ruining her reputation and her marriage. Julian's family, obsessed with their reputation, didn't want anything to do with the poor girl, who lied about her background, and suddenly, Julian was looking at Chloe differently. Without my money and my support, the perfect life they had built started to crumble. They had to move into a tiny apartment, and Julian had to actually get a real job to cover their debts. I didn't back down. I sold the house for a massive profit, put the money into a retirement fund for myself, and finally took the luxury Mediterranean cruise I'd been dreaming of for 20 years. I spent my Christmas on a deck in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by people who didn't care about my aesthetic, but cared about my stories. I learned that you cannot buy someone's respect, and you certainly shouldn't have to pay for the privilege of being treated like a human being by your own child. I realize now that my love was a shield that turned her into a coward. By taking that shield away, I gave her the only thing I hadn't given her yet, a dose of reality. Blood might be thicker than water, but it isn't thicker than dignity. If you don't respect the person who built the ladder you're standing on, don't be surprised when they decide to take it back and let you see how far the drop really is. Like this video if you were on my side and think Chloe got exactly what she deserved for her arrogance. Subscribe for more stories like this where the truth finally comes to light and the underdog finally gets their win. And please share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far by humiliating her in front of her peers? Or was this the only way to make her understand the value of a mother's sacrifice? I'll see you all in the next story.